Hi, I'm Darlene. At my own birthday, my sister raised her glass and said, "She still lives off handouts." The whole room laughed, but no one knew my portfolio manager was about to call. On speaker. They thought I was the weak one, the one who never figured it out. But what if I told you they erased me from the family trust, cropped me out of photos, used my money to host the very party where they humiliated me? And still, they smiled like nothing was wrong. So tell me, how do you stay quiet when your own family rewrites your story to fit theirs? The gravel under my heels crunched louder than I expected. I slowed down, adjusted the strap of my purse, and took a deep breath before stepping into the courtyard. The Kane estate was glowing with string lights, polished marble, and the self-importance of old money trying to look casual. My family had always mastered the art of showmanship, but tonight, they perfected erasure. A large welcome board stood at the entrance, etched in cursive gold. Merrilee's Charitable Gala, honoring family. I stared at it longer than I should have. My birthday, my money, her name. A valet nodded toward me, hesitating. Miss, are you with catering? I smiled tightly. No, I'm with the family. Inside the foyer, people milled about in curated dresses and well-practiced laughter. My mother floated by in navy satin, the same expression she wore at every fundraiser, gracious, untouchable. A guest leaned in, whispering loudly enough, "Is that Merrilee's assistant? Or cousin?" I kept walking. It wasn't worth correcting, not here. Someone passed me a glass of champagne, and I made my way to the edge of the ballroom where the ceiling stretched high with imported chandeliers. Every detail had been chosen to echo taste, prestige, and Merrilee's vision. The signature cocktails were labeled after her childhood nicknames. There was even a branded ice sculpture, her initials carved into frozen pride. A tap on my shoulder made me turn. Merrilee, in a pearl-sheathed dress, leaned in with that practiced smile. "Dar, you made it! Perfect timing!" She wrapped her arms around me like we were close, like I hadn't funded the whole event and been left out of the program. "I have a little surprise for you later," she said, her voice syrupy. "You've always been special." I don't know what irritated me more, the fakery or the word special, like I was a charity case. After a few rounds of greetings and forced grins, dinner was announced. The ballroom doors opened, revealing long tables decked in candlelight and floral arrangements. My place card was missing. Merrilee gestured to the end seat like it was some kind of honor. During dessert, she stood and clinked her glass. "Everyone, if I could have a moment. Tonight, we're not only celebrating family, we're lifting up someone who's always needed a little help and always found her way back." My stomach tightened. She turned toward me. "Darlene, sweet sister, I got you something I think you'll love." A staff member brought over a wrapped package. I opened it slowly. Inside was a gently used leather tote. A flyer for a women's workforce reintegration program peeked from the pocket. "Figured it'd help you get back on your feet," Merrilee added. "They have great workshops, confidence building, resume coaching. I hear they even help with interview outfits." Laughter bubbled around the room, uneasy but present. My hands didn't tremble, not visibly, but inside, something tilted. I held the tote by the straps and nodded. "Thank you, that's thoughtful." Merrilee smirked, satisfied with the performance. Mother gave an approving nod, as if this was a necessary intervention. I returned to my seat, placed the bag under the table, and pretended not to notice the sideways glances. Later, while people danced and chatted, I slipped away toward the hallway. The slideshow had started. Clips of childhood, family moments, success stories. Merrilee at debate tournaments, Merrilee accepting awards, Merrilee hugging mom. I waited, foolishly, for even one frame of me. Not as background, just once. Instead, a photo flashed where I remembered standing beside my father at his retirement event. In this version, I wasn't in the frame. Cropped, clean. I wandered outside to the garden. The air was cooler, quieter. I leaned against the stone railing, watching lights from the pool ripple across the grass. No one followed, no one noticed. I had paid for this night. Every rental, every tray of appetizers, every curated jazz playlist. But I didn't know I'd bought a stage for my own humiliation. The air outside was crisp, enough to sting the back of my throat. I stood there longer than I should have, not because I needed a break, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted to walk back into that room and pretend any longer. But I did. Eventually. The music had shifted by the time I returned, the kind of jazz that tried too hard to feel sophisticated, but instead sounded like background noise for disappointment. I found my seat again, still at the far end of the table, still nameless. I took one slow sip of champagne, trying to cool the ache in my jaw before it hardened into something permanent. Then merrily stood up. Her fork tapped the rim of her glass twice. The room quieted, not entirely, but enough. She didn't wait for full attention. She never did. She was used to assuming the room belonged to her. "I'd like to take a moment to say something," she began, holding her glass with the posture of a politician mid-campaign. "You know, every family has that one person we carry, don't they?" A few scattered chuckles. "That one sibling who means well, but never quite. Sticks the landing." Her eyes slid toward me, casual, like a blade laid gently across the table. "Some of us build companies. Others. Well, some still live off handouts." There was a sharp pause, followed by forced laughter from a few guests who didn't know whether to cringe or clap. Some smiled awkwardly. One woman next to me muttered, "Oh, wow," and reached for her water. I didn't blink. I didn't frown. I didn't flinch. I raised my glass to her from across the room, silent, steady, and drank. She wanted a reaction. She wanted the room to know I was small. Instead, I let them watch her tower over me. Because there's something worse than being dismissed. It's watching someone try too hard to look powerful. The rest of the speech blurred. I stopped listening the moment I realized this wasn't about me. It was about her fear that I might no longer be hers to define. A few minutes later, I stepped away. I didn't announce it, didn't ask permission. I walked the long path toward the garden again, but this time I didn't make it outside. I stopped near the open patio door, where the string lights cast enough shadow to hide behind. That's where my mother found me. Glendora moved like always. Quiet heels, composed lips, a scent of something expensive that didn't smell like warmth. She didn't ask if I was okay. She never had. "You didn't have to let her say that," I said softly. Not pleading, just placing it on the table. She adjusted a bracelet on her wrist, tilting her head as if the comment didn't register. "It was a joke, darling." I stared at her. "A joke." She nodded, tone clipped. "Besides, she's not wrong." My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. She kept going. "You've always been fragile, Darlene. Sensitive. You were never built for this world the way Marilee is. She's got direction, drive. She moves things forward. You—" She paused, tilting her head again. "You float." Something in me stopped breathing, but not in a drowning way, in a surfacing way. I could have argued. I could have asked if she remembered who kept the lights on during Dad's surgery, or who wrote the grant that funded her favorite charity's expansion. But I didn't need to prove it. Not to her. Not anymore. I simply said, if staying silent is the price of being family, maybe it's time I start redefining what family means. She blinked at me, not used to resistance, especially not in that voice. I turned, walked down the hallway, and into the nearest restroom to collect myself. Inside, soft lighting and polished marble surrounded me, sterile and curated like everything else in that house. I leaned over the sink and dabbed my lipstick with a tissue. The face that stared back at me wasn't broken, but it wasn't whole either. It was unfinished, in progress, tired of apologizing for becoming something different. "They laughed," I whispered to my reflection. "They clapped. They nodded, as if I should be grateful just to be in the room." I pressed my palms flat against the counter, steadied my breath, and stood up straighter. There were no tears, no monologue, just a choice not to shrink anymore. Let them laugh. I've already paid for the microphone. I stepped out of the powder room, still adjusting the strap of my dress at the shoulder, still deciding whether I wanted to stay. The hallway was quiet now, the clink of glasses and buzz of small talk fading just beyond the archway. It gave me time to breathe, to recalibrate. I didn't go back to the ballroom right away. Instead, I drifted through the west corridor, passing familiar portraits of unfamiliar truths. That hallway had always bothered me. The family wall, as Mother called it, framed evidence of worthiness: weddings, award ceremonies, society galas. The images weren't just curated, they were editorial, and in almost every frame, Marilee stood in the center, polished and celebrated. I stopped in front of one I hadn't seen in years, a gala from our father's final year at the firm. I remembered the night clearly. I had flown in from San Francisco, changed in the back of a taxi, and still made it in time to stand beside him during his retirement toast. I even remembered what I wore, a navy pantsuit and flats, because I hadn't had time for heels. In this version of the photo, I wasn't there. I took a step closer. My father stood smiling, Marilee at his right, Mother just behind. The space where I should have been, gone, cropped, rebalanced, erased like I had never shown up at all. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. What I felt was weightless, like a ghost who had shown up to haunt her own life. A small voice piped up beside me. "Aunt Darlene, were you not invited to that party?" I turned slightly. It was Eleanor's daughter, Harper, maybe 8 or 9. Her fingers were sticky with frosting, eyes wide and genuinely curious. "I was there," I said with a soft smile. "But not everyone sees the same story." She looked back at the photo. "That's not fair." I crouched to her level. "No, it's not. But it helps me remember who really matters, who should be in the picture." She nodded, like she understood more than most adults in the house ever had. I stood and kept moving, my heels muffled by the thick runner. It didn't take long before I reached the edge of the kitchen entrance, where a staff member asked if I needed anything. I shook my head and slipped out to the side hall, past the linen closet, and into the small study off the guest wing. 2 weeks ago, I'd sat in a very different office. That day, it had rained. The kind of spring rain that doesn't cleanse anything, just soaks through your coat and makes traffic miserable. I had met with Jonathan, the family's longtime estate attorney, to finalize quarterly adjustments for the foundation's reinvestment structure. We had worked together for years. As he flipped through the file, his voice softened. "You should be aware. The revised family trust doesn't list you anymore." I blinked. "I'm sorry?" He cleared his throat. "Your name was removed. Glendora requested it last summer. Said you weren't in a position to manage long-term estate responsibilities." There had been no warning, no conversation, just a silent decision that I no longer qualified. I didn't cry then either. I just closed the folder and nodded once. "I see," I said. "Well, good thing I've been building my own." I thought about that now, standing in the study, the contrast of that sterile law office with this ornate, over-perfumed house. They edited me out of a photo, then a trust. Eventually, they'd probably rewrite family history, so I was never part of it at all. But maybe that wasn't entirely bad. I walked back toward the party, not with bitterness, but with an unfamiliar clarity. The air felt different. Or maybe I did. They had always treated the Kane name like a gate. You earned it by compliance, by staying quiet, by fitting the frame. But I had stopped fitting a long time ago, and I had no interest in getting back inside. I passed Glendora talking to a banker in the corner, her voice bright and well-practiced. Marilee was being photographed with donors near the champagne fountain, tilting her head at that exact angle she knew played well in press releases. I didn't interrupt them. I didn't need to. What I'd built couldn't be cropped, or edited, or conveniently left out of the family slideshow. It didn't need their stamp. It had mine. I didn't need the name. I built something they can't redact. I moved through the dining room just as the servers began clearing empty dessert plates. The scent of caramel and espresso still lingered, faintly masking the bitter edge of everything else. I kept my head high, not because I felt strong, but because I refused to let anyone here see anything they could twist into weakness. The lights dimmed again, and I knew what was coming. A projector flickered on near the dance floor, illuminating a large white wall that moments earlier had been covered in hand-painted ivy. A journey of strength. The Dunch Cane women appeared in gold script, glowing like something sacred. I took a seat near the back, close enough to see, far enough to be forgotten. The first image was a childhood shot of Marilee, front and center at a school spelling bee. She was maybe 7, holding a trophy half her size. The next few slides followed the same rhythm. Marilee volunteering, Marilee graduating, Marilee shaking hands with local council members. Each photo was crisp, posed, and perfectly lit. Then came Glendora, graceful in her tailored suits, standing beside charity banners and speaking at podiums. Eventually, I showed up. Except, not really. In one photo, I was slumped in a hospital bed after minor surgery, Marilee smiling beside me like a concerned guardian. Another slide showed me, years younger, standing behind my sister while she held an award. My hands awkwardly cropped at the edges of the frame. A voiceover began, warm and sentimental. Every strong woman stands on the shoulders of the one who held her through weakness. Our family thrives because we lift each other. The message was clear. Marilee was the one doing the lifting. I was the one being carried. A few people turned to glance at me, subtle, but I saw it. A silent, shared expression. Sympathy, pity, a little confusion. Like they were rethinking everything they'd ever assumed about me, which would have been great if it had come from truth and not fabrication. The lights came back on to a round of soft clapping. Not for me, never for me. Just as I was about to rise, Glendora appeared at my side. Her smile was polite, polished, too clean. "I thought you might appreciate this," she said, pressing a cream-colored envelope into my hand. "It's just something helpful. You've always been my most emotionally intuitive girl." I opened it slowly. A prepaid certificate for a weekend women's retreat in Vermont. Emotional wellness, trauma healing, leadership workshops. I didn't look at her right away. I just stared at the card, absorbing every implication it carried. "You think I'm broken?" Glendora's expression didn't change. She tilted her head slightly, voice gentle. "Not broken, just unfinished." I folded the envelope carefully and returned it to her outstretched hand. "Thank you," I said, "but I'll pass." She blinked. "Darling, it's not a judgment." "Of course not," I replied, stepping past her. "You just paid someone else to deliver it." The music had returned to its earlier rhythm. Soft jazz, politely forgettable. Across the room, Marilee stood near the mic again, offering her closing remarks with just the right mix of sentimentality and showmanship. As people raised their glasses to toast the legacy of powerful women, I slipped into the side hall. They could have their performance. I had already lived the reality. Somewhere along the corridor, I paused. The hush of the hallway, the muted footsteps behind closed doors. It was all suddenly clearer than anything said over a microphone tonight. I pulled out my phone, opened the email draft I had started earlier that week. The subject line still read, "If I ever have to explain myself." I stared at the blank body of the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I hit save and locked the screen. I used to think they misunderstood me, misread my silence, my distance, my refusal to play along. But now I saw it for what it really was. They needed me diminished, easier to carry than to confront. They needed me small to feel big. The last of the applause faded as I returned to my table, my steps measured, deliberate. The lights stayed low for a moment longer, long enough for me to reclaim my seat without attracting attention. I sipped the last of my champagne, letting the bubbles sting. Across the room, people leaned in toward one another, already pivoting to their next topic: networking, foundation grants, vacation homes. And then Eva appeared beside me. Ava Townsend, someone I hadn't spoken to since college, not really. She leaned in close, as if sharing a harmless secret. "I don't mean to be rude," she whispered, her voice honeyed with the kind of fake concern that never lands well. "But I heard you've been on unemployment? Merrily said something at the alumni brunch, said you were still trying to figure things out." My gaze slid to hers, calm, flat. I didn't rush the answer. Instead, I smiled, tipped my glass ever so slightly, and asked quietly, "Did she mention who signs her foundation's back-end checks?" Eva blinked. She straightened, mumbled something about needing to find her husband, and didn't speak to me again for the rest of the evening. I didn't mind. The lights dimmed once more, this time for what they announced as a final tribute to the next generation. I knew what was coming. Another slideshow, another carefully curated narrative. On screen, the title card glowed in bold serif letters: "The Next Generation of Kane Women." A soundtrack of soft piano trickled through hidden speakers. The first slide featured Marilee, again, at a leadership summit. Then her posing with Glendora at a Women in Business luncheon. More photos followed, smiling with politicians, cutting ribbons at charity events, mentoring interns like she invented the word. And then, me. Just one photo. Grainy, overexposed, clearly 5 or 6 years old. I remembered the dress because I'd donated it right after that evening. The caption beneath the image read, "Still discovering her path. We're proud of her perseverance." No mention of what I'd actually done. No nod to anything real. Around me, a few people shifted uncomfortably. A whisper behind me cut through the soundtrack. Did she ever even finish Columbia? I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The whole point of the slide was to invite doubt, to paint me as a puzzle never solved, a story without a real ending. The music swelled. The screen faded. A polite clap followed. I stood. Not quickly, not with flair, but with intention. I crossed the room, bypassing the caterers, ignoring Glendora's subtle shake of her head from the corner. I walked straight to Marilee, who stood near the dessert table, all charm and poise and false modesty. She saw me coming, and for a moment, I saw it flicker, the recognition that I wasn't playing anymore. "You can lie all you want," I said, my voice low but firm, "but you might want to double-check who underwrites your silent partners before spinning your next story." Marilee's smile barely faltered. "Darlene, don't be dramatic. It was lighthearted." I stepped a fraction closer. "You think this is light? Keep pushing. Next time, I won't be quiet. I'll show you the weight of what I've built, publicly." I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, past the marble pillars and servers and gold-rimmed glasses. As I passed the grand piano, I paused for just a moment, watching a man in a tux awkwardly fumble through the keys. Offbeat, out of rhythm, exactly how this family felt now. I pulled my phone from my clutch, opened the Notes app, and added one line under the email draft I had left open earlier. "They need the illusion. I only need the truth." Just as I tucked my phone away, the lights in the ballroom dimmed again. A soft chime rang out. Glendora's cue for a champagne toast. I knew the rhythm by heart. This was her favorite part of any event. The clink of crystal, the soft lift of a glass, and the perfectly timed anecdote that made her sound charitable without revealing anything true. I hesitated at the threshold, debating whether to return to my seat or let the night continue without me. But something in me didn't want to hide anymore. Not after what I'd just said to Marilee. So I stepped inside. The servers moved gracefully between tables, pouring the last round of bubbles. The piano player resumed his soft melody. And just as Glendora raised her glass, with rehearsed grace, my phone vibrated again inside my clutch. I fished it out instinctively, glancing at the screen. It was Camden. Before I could silence the call, I heard his voice, clear, steady, and devastating, echoing across the entire ballroom. The overhead speakers crackled once, then came alive with his words. "Hi, Darlene. Just confirming the $12.4 million rollover into the new fund. Your allocation strategy looks rock solid. I'll lock the ESG side this afternoon." Every chair froze. Every hand paused mid-toast. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered near the dessert cart, the sound piercing through the awkward silence like a warning shot. I didn't move. I didn't have to. The room had already turned. All eyes were on me, including Marilee's, her expression flickering between disbelief and something far more dangerous: exposure. I waited 3 seconds, long enough to feel it land, then walked slowly toward the main table. No rush, no drama. When I reached Marilee, I slid an envelope across the table. She stared at it like it might bite. She opened it carefully. Inside, a detailed invoice. Venue rental, paid. Full catering, paid. Lighting and decor, paid. Live music, valet staff, floral arrangements, line by line, each one itemized and stamped as processed from my own holding company's private ledger. Paid in full. Quietly. Weeks ago. "Enjoy the evening," I said, addressing no one in particular. "The house is on me." And I left. The hallway felt different now, lighter, less like something I needed to escape from, and more like a place I'd just stopped apologizing for occupying. I moved toward the garden again, slipping past the portraits and candlelight without a second glance. Outside, the night had settled. The air was cooler. I could hear the faint hum of murmurs starting to bubble behind me, the kind of noise that meant something had cracked, and no one knew quite how to seal it back up. My phone buzzed again. A text from Camden. Didn't realize the mic was still synced. "Want me to call back?" I smiled. "Perfect timing. You said it better than I ever could." I looked out over the manicured hedges and the flickering string lights that had once made this place feel like a fairy tale. Now they just looked like theater dressing. In the silence, I felt the shift. Not just in them, but in me. The laughter had stopped. The clapping had faded. And for the first time, perception wasn't something they could control with polished photos and strategic seating charts. Let them talk. The truth just took the mic. I left the garden just after 10. By the time I got back to my apartment, I had kicked off my shoes, peeled off my earrings, and was halfway through wiping off my mascara when my phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. At first, I thought it was Camden checking in. But when I picked it up, the notifications didn't stop. Mentions, tags, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I tapped into one of the links, still sitting in front of the bathroom mirror in my slip. The video had been uploaded barely 40 minutes earlier, shot vertically from across the ballroom. It was grainy, a little shaky, but the audio came through perfectly. Marilee, standing with her glass raised. Some of us build empires, others still live off handouts. Laughter, applause. Then silence as Camden's voice took over the speakers. "Hi, Darlene. Just confirming the $12.4 million rollover into the new fund." I watched myself blink in the video, not flinch. Just stand there, stone still. At the bottom corner of the screen, someone had added a caption in bold white font. "Birthday ambush." The view count was already at 312,000. Within the next hour, it hit 1.8 million. I kept scrolling. "Y'all, this woman paid for the whole party and got dragged like a stranger." That's not teasing. That's financial gaslighting. Rich families love to humiliate the kid they can't control. She's not the problem. She's the mirror they don't want to look into. For the first time all night, I exhaled. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I didn't even like any of it. I just watched. And the internet did what it does best. Connects dots faster than any family can scramble. The next morning, while I was nursing a quiet coffee by the window, the emails started rolling in. Not from strangers. From names I recognized. Old friends, former coworkers, even 2 exes. I had no idea. If I ever laughed at a story they told about you, I'm sorry. Wow, that video hit different. I didn't answer any of them, because the truth wasn't new. It was just louder now. By noon, Glendora had released a carefully worded statement to the local paper. Private family moments taken out of context should not become public spectacle. We love all of our children equally. Of course she did. Marilee posted a short video to her foundation's page, wearing a blazer and just enough makeup to look relatable. We support Darlene's journey and always have. Families tease each other. It's how we show love. I'm heartbroken this was misconstrued. The comments weren't kind. You didn't tease, you embarrassed. Imagine building your empowerment brand on someone else's back. This is why women don't speak up in families like yours. I watched it all unfold from my balcony that evening. The sun dipped over the Hudson, lighting the river in streaks of copper and gold. The wind moved slow, steady, like it had time. I sat there with a blanket over my knees, a cup of mint tea in my hand, and let the buzz play in the distance. I didn't need to defend myself. They had told on themselves. Glendora's statement got picked apart on a podcast by a woman who had been disowned for marrying outside her race. Marilee's foundation page lost thousands of followers overnight. A major brand partnership disappeared before the weekend ended. Someone even unearthed an old article where Marilee took credit for a business idea I had floated to her years ago. I hadn't thought about that in forever, but the receipts were still there, in emails, timestamps, drafts. The internet doesn't forget. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I didn't even smile. I just let it burn, because for the first time, I didn't have to explain. I didn't have to soften the edges of the story to make it palatable. They wanted to control how I was seen. I let the truth do the seeing instead. I ignored the interview requests, the DM offers from women-centered publications asking for exclusives, the podcast invites, the morning show angles. I wasn't interested in making this a spectacle. That had been their specialty. I had work to do. Quiet work. Real work. By the time Thursday came around, Marilee had been dropped from a major campaign tied to women in tech. The press release didn't name me, but it didn't have to. Glendora stepped down from her board position to spend more time with family. No one asked which family she meant. And me? I deleted the draft email I'd held onto for months, the one titled, "If I ever have to explain myself." I didn't take them down. They collapsed under their own weight. The morning after everything unraveled, I was already halfway through my second cup of black coffee when the screen lit up with a headline I hadn't expected to see so soon. Mysterious CEO behind disruptive fintech revealed. Meet Darlene Scov. The news segment played on every major finance network, one after the other. The anchors repeated my name with that same mix of fascination and hesitancy people use when they realize they've underestimated someone. They showed footage of me walking out of the JP Morgan headquarters earlier that week. The camera angle wasn't flattering. I wasn't posing. I wasn't smiling. I was simply leaving a meeting, coat slung over my shoulder, folder in hand, earbuds still in. Just doing business. But suddenly, that simple image was revolutionary. The anchor continued. She's been quietly funding major shifts in the fintech landscape. And, perhaps most unexpectedly, she also funded the infamous birthday party where she was publicly shamed by her own sister. I watched, not because I needed validation, but because I wanted to see how it felt. And honestly, it felt quiet. It felt done. Screenshots of the Jataum birthday ambush clip flashed next to my corporate headshot. My resume filled the lower third. Stanford alum, private capital strategist, founder of Haven Equity. There was no mention of Marilee, no quote from Glendora. For once, I existed in a story without being edited into the background. By noon, the headlines had changed their tone entirely. Words like dignity, strategic, and poised were now being used to describe me. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just closed the laptop and went about my day. Later that evening, I received a forwarded link from a colleague. Marilee had made an appearance at a public fundraiser in Soho. She arrived on the arm of Nate Carlisle, my ex. A man I had once seriously considered marrying, back before he became more interested in hedge fund PR than anything real. The tabloid caption read, "Merrily Dunch finds love amid controversy." The photo showed her laughing too hard at something he'd said. Her arm wrapped just tightly enough around his to make a point. A few sources leaked that she had personally arranged the date, that it had been set up specifically for the photographers waiting outside. A desperate move to seem unfazed, to reclaim power through illusion. I didn't feel betrayed. Not really. Nate and I had ended years ago, and if his ambition aligned with her vanity, they were probably perfect for each other. But it was Glendora's move that hit lower. She gave a quote to a legacy magazine the next day. "All families argue. Darlene was always the more sensitive one. She just didn't like being teased." Teased. As if my erasure had been a game. As if I hadn't been erased at all, but had simply refused to laugh along. I didn't issue a response. I didn't do interviews. I didn't hold press conferences. Instead, I called my assistant and told her to release the internal report we'd been refining for weeks. It included the full funding structure of Haven Equity, every stakeholder, every dollar traced, every policy linked to public access, transparency, and female-led capital reallocation. Then I wrote one line. I sent it to Bloomberg. My work has always spoken louder than I ever needed to. This moment is no different. No hashtags, no photos, no link in bio. Just clarity. I also finalized something else that afternoon. A new foundation. One designed specifically to fund women rebuilding their lives after being pushed out. By families, by institutions, by silence. I named it after my grandmother. The only woman in the cane line who had ever seen me without agenda. Not my mother, not merrily. And I didn't dedicate the foundation with a speech or a gala. I did it with a wire transfer, a statement of purpose, and a promise to never use another woman's pain as decoration for my own image. They played games with masks. I built something that didn't require one. 2 weeks later, I stood in the back corner of a community center in Beacon, sipping weak coffee from a paper cup, watching kids scurry around folding chairs like they were part of an obstacle course. No gala gowns, no hors d'oeuvres passed on silver trays, just cracked tile floors, warm light, and the unmistakable sound of people showing up because they cared, not because a camera might catch it. A volunteer handed me a stack of pamphlets for the Foundation's first public meet and greet. I nodded, thanked her, and tucked them into a canvas tote. A few women who had benefited from our first round of grants spoke at the front of the room. Raw, unrehearsed stories about leaving abusive homes, re-entering the workforce, fighting for custody, rebuilding. One woman held her toddler on her hip the entire time, and no one minded. In fact, they leaned in closer. That was the moment a girl, no older than 9, walked up and tugged gently at the hem of my coat. She had a jelly stain on her shirt and a program clutched in her hands. Her hair was braided tightly, like someone had taken their time that morning. "Miss Scov?" she asked, shy but curious. I crouched to meet her eyes. "Yes?" She held up the brochure. "You were in here. You look important." I smiled. "Well, sometimes I am." She hesitated, then asked the kind of question only a child dares to ask so plainly. "Were you ever sad when people said you weren't smart or good at stuff?" I wasn't ready for it, but I didn't flinch. I took a breath, then answered honestly. "I wasn't sad because they said it," I told her. "I was sad because, for a long time, I believed them." She looked at me for a second longer, then leaned forward and gave me the smallest, fiercest hug I'd received in years. "You look like a superhero now," she said, before running off to rejoin the other kids near the snack table. I stayed where I was, staring at the space she'd just left. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't headline-worthy. It was real. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, peeling an orange while the evening news murmured softly from the TV in the next room. "Merrily Dunch," the anchor said, has officially stepped down from her position as head of Empower Forward, following months of public pressure and internal restructuring. No montage, no tribute, just a sentence, factual and final. Another segment followed, this time about Glendora. She had taken a leave of absence to focus on her health and family. There were no interviews, no farewell op-eds, just quiet. A week after that, a card arrived in the mail. No return address. Just 6 words in handwriting I'd seen my entire life. You were never supposed to win. No signature, no threats. But I knew exactly who wrote it. I folded the card once, placed it in the same drawer where I kept my grandmother's recipe book and the last birthday card she ever wrote me. There was no rage in me, no satisfaction either, just understanding. I went for a walk that evening, down by the river. It was chilly, but not bitter. I passed a few joggers, couples walking dogs, a group of teens laughing too loud for the space they were in. I kept my hands in my pockets, my scarf tight around my neck. I stopped at the same bench where, 3 years earlier, I'd nearly quit everything. I had sat there with an unopened job rejection email, a drained bank account, and no plan. I had stared at the water then, thinking maybe my family was right, that I wasn't built for this world. Now I looked out at the same river and saw something different. Not redemption, not revenge, but proof. Proof that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause or headlines. It arrives in tiny, private victories, a full fridge, a rent check mailed on time, a foundation launched without a press release, a girl asking you, without hesitation, if you'd ever felt small, and believing you when you say you did. Back home, I opened my laptop. The old draft was still there. If I ever have to explain myself. I deleted it, then opened a new one. To future me. First line, we didn't break. We became. They tried to erase me from their story, so I wrote my own.
Hi, I'm Bombalina. Last Thanksgiving Eve, my parents kicked me out, calling me a burden, after years of paying every bill they had. But that wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was the lies they whispered behind closed doors, lies that drained my savings, stole my name, and crushed every ounce of trust I had left. What really happened to the girl who gave everything, and still wasn't enough? Thanksgiving Eve smelled like burnt ham and desperation the moment I stepped into the house. My hands were still stiff from the cold after my long shift, keys jangling loosely in my numb fingers. The living room looked the same, flickering old Christmas lights strung half-heartedly over the mantel, the scent of something burnt wafting from the kitchen. But the air was different. It was heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to happen. Victor stood by the doorway, arms crossed, a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey hanging from his hand. Lenora sat silently on the worn couch, staring blankly at the muted television, the flashing images casting long shadows across her tired face. Devlin, my younger brother, lingered near the stairs, pretending to be engrossed in his phone, but his wide, darting eyes told another story. Before I could even put down my purse, Victor's voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the room. "You're a burden, Bambalina. You need to leave. Tonight." For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard him. Maybe the exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But no. Lenora didn't look up. She didn't flinch. She just sat there, hands clenched together, as if she had already made peace with this cruelty long before I walked in. I stood frozen, the cold from outside still clinging to my coat, now seeping deeper into my bones. My throat tightened, but I didn't let a single tear fall. Crying would give them something to mock, something to feed on. "You're serious," I said, my voice steady, almost detached. Victor sneered, taking a sloppy sip from the bottle. "Dead serious. You think you're doing us a favor paying a few bills? Acting like you're some savior? Please, you've overstayed your welcome. Time for you to stand on your own 2 feet." I wanted to laugh in his face. Stand on my own 2 feet? I had been carrying this damn family for years, paying the electric, the water, even putting gas in their ancient car when no one else had 2 nickels to rub together. But now, tonight of all nights, I was the problem. Devlin shifted nervously, opening his mouth like he wanted to say something, anything, but Lenora's sharp shake of the head silenced him. My heart broke a little seeing him wilt under her gaze. Without a word, I turned on my heel and climbed the stairs. My room, always a little too cold, a little too small, greeted me with its usual indifference. I moved mechanically, grabbing my suitcase, shoving clothes and important papers into it. I snatched my laptop, my charger, my birth certificate, the essentials for starting over. Sitting on the bed, laptop balanced on my knees, I logged into every utility account tied to this house. One by one, electricity, water, gas, internet. I removed my payment information. Click, confirm, click, confirm. It felt surgical, clean. As I was zipping my suitcase, there was a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Devlin, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he held out a torn piece of paper. His voice cracked as he whispered, "They said, if you leave, you'll destroy this family." I stared at the note, the messy handwriting unmistakably Victor's. It wasn't a plea. It was a guilt trip wrapped in an ultimatum. I folded the paper neatly and tucked it into my coat pocket without reading it again. I knelt down to Devlin's eye level and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me," I said softly but firmly. "You are not their tool. You're not responsible for their choices. Understand?" He nodded quickly, blinking back tears. I ruffled his hair lightly, a final act of silent rebellion, and stood up. Dragging my suitcase behind me, I descended the stairs. Victor sat smirking at the bottom, as if daring me to say something, to beg. Lenora still wouldn't look at me. I walked past them without a word, the wheels of my suitcase bumping against the cracked linoleum. Victor's final jab followed me out the door. "Good luck out there, princess. Let's see how far you get without us." I didn't dignify it with a response. I stepped out into the biting night air, my breath fogging instantly. The driveway was slick with frost, the old streetlights buzzing faintly above. I loaded my suitcase into my battered sedan, the trunk creaking under the weight of it all. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I allowed myself one last glance at the house. The windows were dark, except for the faint glow of the TV. No one stood at the door to stop me. No one called my name. Fine. Let it be that way. I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching against the frozen gravel. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt, as if every mile put more distance between me and the years of thankless sacrifice I had foolishly labeled as love. The night swallowed my old life whole, but I wasn't ready to drown with it. I didn't remember much of the drive to Yvette's place, just the blur of dark frozen streets and the hollow sound of the heater struggling against the cold. My hands were stiff on the steering wheel, and my mind buzzed with 1,000 unfinished thoughts. By the time I pulled into the cracked parking lot outside her apartment complex, it was well past midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a pale, sickly glow. Yvette answered the door in sweatpants and a worn college hoodie, her brown hair pulled into a messy bun. She didn't say much, just stepped aside and opened her arms. No judgment, no questions, just a solid, grounding hug that lasted longer than I realized I needed. "Stay as long as you need," she murmured. Inside, her apartment was small, but warm, cluttered in a cozy kind of way. A lone candle burned on the coffee table, filling the room with the scent of vanilla. I dropped my suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and without wasting a second, pulled my laptop from my bag. The world outside could wait. Tonight, I had work to finish. I sat at her small kitchen table while Yvette disappeared into her bedroom to give me space. I opened the necessary tabs, one by one: electricity, water, gas, internet, Amazon Prime, Netflix, the entire infrastructure I had been quietly financing for years. With every click of remove payment method, a different kind of shackle fell away. Click, cancel, confirm. Done. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't second-guessing. I moved methodically, cutting each tie with the same precision someone might use to disarm a bomb. In a way, that's exactly what I was doing, dismantling the weapon that had been pointed at me my entire adult life. I had supported them in silence for too long, I whispered under my breath. Now, I'm ending it. Silently. By the time I closed my laptop, the clock on the wall blinked 2:07 a.m. I leaned back, feeling the full weight of exhaustion catch up to me all at once. But under the fatigue, there was something else humming in my veins. Relief. It didn't last long. At 6:13 a.m., my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand next to Yvette's couch where I had crashed. Groggy, I grabbed it, blinking at the sudden flood of notifications, missed calls, voicemails, text messages. The first voicemail was Victor's voice, slurred with rage. "You selfish brat! The power's out! The internet's dead! What did you do? After everything we gave you, you just walk out? You think you're better than us?" Delete. The second voicemail came from Lenora, her tone a frantic whisper. "Bombalina, please, sweetheart. It's freezing. We can't cook. We can't even watch TV. Just come home. We'll figure it out. You're tearing this family apart." Delete. My fingers hesitated over the third message. Devlin's number. I opened it. "Devlin. Dad's throwing things. He's yelling your name over and over. He smashed the microwave. Mom's crying. Please be careful." I swallowed hard. Not because I was scared for myself. I had already braced for the fallout. But because Devlin was still in that collapsing house of glass and splinters. I texted back quickly. "Stay away from him. Stay upstairs. Lock your door if you have to. I'll figure something out." By 7 a.m., the barrage had escalated. Now Victor wasn't just leaving voicemails, he was sending texts. "Victor, you ungrateful piece of trash." Victor, "You owe us for everything we gave you." Victor, "You think you can just walk away? There's a price for betrayal." Lenora followed with her own desperate messages. "Lenora, please come back. We'll fix it. Your father's just upset." "He didn't mean it." I could practically hear her rehearsed sobs through the screen, the same sobs she used whenever she needed something: money, time, a silent scapegoat. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved every voicemail, every text, every scrap of evidence. If they wanted to escalate this into something bigger, I would be ready. By 8 a.m., after the 15th call in under 2 hours, I blocked their numbers. Sitting alone in the soft gray light of Yvette's kitchen, I stared at the black screen of my phone. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. "I chose freedom," I said aloud, as if saying it could anchor me to the ground. "I won't be dragged back into the fire I escaped." There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken beyond recognition. The blood ties that once felt unbreakable now hung loose around my neck, finally cut clean. As my parents scrambled in chaos, I was finally breathing for the first time in years. The early morning haze hung over the small kitchen like a damp curtain. Yvette had already left for work, and I found myself sitting alone, wrapped in one of her oversized sweaters, a cup of lukewarm coffee forgotten beside me. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional groan of old pipes expanding against the cold. I opened my laptop again, more out of habit than anything else, intending to check emails or scroll mindlessly. Instead, my hand hovered over the folder labeled Documents, Personal. Something pulled me there, an invisible thread tugging at the parts of me still raw and aching. I clicked it open. It was mostly boring paperwork, old insurance forms, scanned receipts, copies of my driver's license and social security card. But as I flipped through the files, one document caught my eye, a credit card statement, dated 3 years ago. My brows furrowed. I didn't recognize the account number. I definitely didn't remember opening a new card around that time. I scrolled through the charges: grocery stores, gas stations, utility payments, places I knew too well. But it wasn't the list of purchases that made my stomach twist into knots. It was the signature line at the bottom: Lenora Bambalina, my mother's scrawl, sloppy and half-hearted, like she didn't even care if she got caught. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, hoping, stupidly, that maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some explanation, some mix-up. But deep down, I knew better. I cross-referenced the statement against my old bank accounts. Month after month, the payments had come out of my checking account automatically. Small amounts at first, barely noticeable. Then larger ones, creeping higher as time passed, bleeding me dry without my even realizing it. Silent theft disguised as familial need. The realization hit harder than anything Victor had screamed at me. Because this wasn't an explosion fueled by whiskey or pride. This was methodical, calculated, a betrayal that stretched back years. I leaned back in the creaky kitchen chair, closing my eyes, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. Flashbacks surfaced like unwanted ghosts. Lenora smiling sweetly when I offered to help with groceries, brushing my hand away and saying, "You're young, Bombolina. You'll make more money. It's just money. We're family after all." Or Victor barking, "It's your duty. Family sticks together." Whenever I hesitated about covering another unpaid bill, it wasn't help they had wanted. It was control, ownership. I opened another document, an old email thread between Lenora and a credit card company. She had written in my name, posing as me, explaining away late payments, forging my voice as easily as she had forged my trust. My fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a simmering fury I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel until now. This wasn't just selfishness, this was theft, fraud. And it had been happening under my nose while I worked overtime shifts, skipped dinners with friends, missed vacations, all so they could keep the lights on and the Wi-Fi running. I thought about calling her, thought about screaming down the line, demanding to know how she could do this to me. But what would be the point? Lenora would just cry, play the victim, make it about how hard life had been, how much she had sacrificed. She would spin her web like she always did, trapping me again in threads of guilt and obligation. Not this time. Instead, I took screenshots, saved the statements, forwarded every email to a private folder. I was building a file, not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved the protection they had always denied me. Sitting there in the soft morning light, I felt something shift inside me, a hardening, a final severance. This time, I whispered into the empty kitchen, my anger will be a weapon, not a weakness. I wasn't the daughter they could gaslight anymore. I wasn't a piggy bank with a heartbeat. I was done pretending that love meant servitude. As the first hints of sunlight crept through the blinds, I packed the documents carefully into a folder and zipped it into my bag. Proof. Armor. The truth burned in my chest, but soon they would feel the fire too. The sun had barely lifted over the city skyline when my phone vibrated sharply on Yvette's kitchen counter, rattling against my coffee mug. I flinched, heart kicking into a faster rhythm, half expecting another barrage of guilt-drenched texts. But this time it wasn't a call. It was a bank alert. Suspicious login attempt detected. Immediate action recommended. I blinked, reading it twice to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The second notification came fast behind the first, 3 failed login attempts from an unknown device. My pulse spiked. I hadn't shared my banking credentials with anyone. No one but me should even know the password. Unless they guessed. Unless someone desperate enough, someone who thought they still had a claim on my life, decided it was time to take what they felt was owed. Victor. It had to be Victor. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my bank's website directly, double-checking everything. Thankfully, no funds had moved yet. No transactions were pending. But the attempts were real, logged neatly in the activity history like footprints left by an intruder. Without hesitation, I enabled multi-factor authentication, changed every password to a random string of letters and symbols, and called the bank's fraud department. I answered their verification questions mechanically, explaining the situation in calm, clipped words. Yes, I believe a family member tried to access my account without permission. Yes, I would like to freeze any unauthorized access immediately. Yes, I want notifications for everything moving forward. When I finally closed the laptop, my hands were steady, but inside a storm churned. This wasn't just emotional blackmail anymore. This was a full-on attack. They wouldn't take another dime from me. Not now. Not ever. I stood up, stretching my tense shoulders. Yvette's tiny kitchen window framed a slice of the morning, a cold, steel blue sky dotted with thin clouds. The world outside looked ordinary, almost peaceful, in direct contrast to the war zone my life had become. By noon, a new front had opened. It started with a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, and another. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I finally listened. How could you abandon your parents on Thanksgiving? A voice, my Aunt Carol's, whined. After everything they've done for you? Shame on you, Bambolina. Another voicemail, this time from Uncle Dennis. They're your parents. They're old. They need you. This isn't how a decent daughter behaves. Text messages flooded in too, from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, friends of the family I barely remembered. Blood is thicker than water. You'll regret this when they're gone. What kind of daughter walks away after all the sacrifices made for her? Sacrifices? What sacrifices? My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with anger. They had no idea what I had given up. They had no clue about the countless bills I had paid, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering why I was never good enough to be seen as more than a convenience. It was all a show. A carefully curated sob story broadcast to anyone willing to listen. I clenched my fists, breathing through the wave of fury. Instead of responding, I blocked each number methodically. One by one, cutting off the noise like pruning dead branches from a tree I no longer intended to save. But I knew I needed to say something publicly. Something to stop the whispers before they grew into rumors too big to ignore. I opened my social media account, hands steady. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I simply wrote, "Family does not give them the right to bleed you dry. Family does not excuse betrayal. Love without respect is not love. It's ownership. I choose to be free." Then I logged out without waiting for the fallout. I knew they would twist it, spin it into another weapon to use against me. I didn't care anymore. If they were going to paint me as the villain in their tragic little play, so be it. I would rather be the villain in their story than the victim in my own. Later that night, I sat alone in Yvette's living room, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, listening to the quiet hum of the heater. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I allowed myself a small, broken smile. They could rage. They could lie. They could weaponize every ounce of pity they could scrape from the bottom of the barrel. But they couldn't reach me anymore. Every angry call, every manipulative text, every whispered guilt trip only confirmed one thing. I had made the right choice. I was no longer the girl who begged for scraps of affection. I wasn't desperate for crumbs of approval. I wasn't their emotional punching bag or their golden ticket. I was something much more dangerous now. I was free. The more they tried to break me, the stronger I realized I had become. The first rays of dawn hadn't even warmed the frosted sidewalks when a thunderous pounding shook Yvette's front door. I jolted upright from the couch, the blanket sliding to the floor. The knocks came again, harder, faster, followed by the unmistakable bark of Victor's voice. "Bambolina! Open this damn door!" I froze for a heartbeat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Yvette, already moving quickly but quietly, pressed a finger to her lips and reached for her phone. I nodded, edging toward the small peephole. One glance confirmed it. Victor, pacing on the tiny porch, fists clenched, rage practically steaming from his skin. His pickup truck idled noisily behind him, exhaust fumes puffing into the chilly air. "Bambolina!" he shouted again, pounding the wood so hard I worried the flimsy door might give. "You ungrateful little brat! Open up or I swear to God—" I backed away slowly, my breath coming in controlled, deliberate pulls. Yvette spoke quietly into the phone, giving the dispatcher our address and explaining the situation. Her voice stayed calm, measured, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting just feet away. Outside, Victor continued his tirade. "You ruined us. You stole from your own family. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us?" I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat back down on the couch, pulling the blanket back over my lap, and waited. My silence was louder than any words he could hurl at me. Minutes dragged by in tense silence until flashing red and blue lights painted the walls. A sharp knock, professional, controlled, followed. "Police! Open up!" Yvette opened the door just enough to let the officers in. 2 uniformed cops entered, assessing the situation with practiced eyes. Through the still open door, I saw Victor being restrained, his hands waving wildly as he shouted, "She's a thief! She's tearing this family apart!" One officer turned to me. "Ma'am, do you know this man?" I stood up, steady and clear. "Yes, he's my biological father. I have no legal obligation to him. He is here uninvited, making threats." I produced a folder from my bag. containing copies of the restraining warnings I had begun preparing the day after Thanksgiving, anticipating just this moment. The officer took it, scanning quickly. "Understood," he said firmly, turning back to Victor. "Sir, you are trespassing. You need to leave immediately or you will be detained." Victor's face twisted with fury, but seeing the futility, he spat on the ground near the porch and stomped back to his truck. Gravel crunched under his boots. The officers stayed until he drove off, their presence a temporary shield. Once the flashing lights disappeared into the distance, Yvette locked the door, bolting it twice for good measure. I sank back into the couch, my hands still steady, my mind sharp. They would escalate. They already had. But I had escalated too, and I wasn't backing down. That evening, just as I thought the worst of the day was over, my phone buzzed again, an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but instinct nudged me otherwise. Against my better judgment, I answered, pressing the phone cautiously to my ear. "Bambolina." It was Lenora, her voice thin, trembling. "Baby, it's me. I'm so sick. I think it's serious this time. The doctors, they said it could be cancer." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I don't have much time left," she whimpered. "Please, come home. Let's forget all this, before it's too late." It was the same script, different act. The guilt, the fear, the bait wrapped in maternal despair. I remembered all the nights I had rushed to her side at the slightest complaint, paid bills I couldn't afford, canceled plans, sacrificed dreams, all because of cries just like this. Cries that, more often than not, evaporated into thin air the moment I handed over money or signed paperwork. This time, I stayed quiet for a moment longer, letting the full weight of her manipulation sink in. "If you respected me," I said, voice soft but unwavering, "you wouldn't need lies to bring me back." Her sharp intake of breath told me I had hit the mark. Without another word, I ended the call and immediately blocked the number. I stared at the darkened screen for a long time, feeling the old pain claw at the edges of my resolve, trying to find purchase. But it couldn't. Not anymore. Yvette, sitting across the room, offered a silent nod of support. No pity, no lectures, just understanding. I leaned back, allowing the tiredness to finally catch up with me. Next time they crossed a line, it wouldn't end with just warnings. No more compromising, no more second chances, no more pretending. This was war now, and I intended to win. The time for warnings was over. Now I would strike back without hesitation. The silence that followed that night wasn't comforting. It was dense, heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I drifted into a shallow, restless sleep curled up on Yvette's couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. By mid-morning, I forced myself to get up and take a short walk around the block, just to clear my mind. The December air bit into my skin, but the sharp cold kept me awake. It wasn't until I rounded the corner back to the apartment complex that a strange emptiness struck me. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. My car was gone. For a moment, I thought maybe I had parked somewhere else. Maybe Yvette had needed the space. But no, it had been right there, 2 spots from the dumpster. I felt my stomach clench into a tight knot. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't some random theft. Yanking out my phone, I opened the GPS tracker app I'd installed years ago after an old coworker had warned me about car thefts. My pulse pounded in my ears as the little blue dot blinked, sitting exactly outside my parents' house. I stared at it, disbelief giving way to a cold, burning anger. Without a second thought, I called the local non-emergency police line, requesting a civil standby. If they thought they could steal from me and still pretend to hold the moral high ground, they were about to learn how wrong they were. It took 15 minutes for the officers to meet me at the edge of the street. I explained the situation calmly, handing them my vehicle registration with my name clearly printed. One officer, a tall man with a steady voice, nodded and led the way up the cracked driveway. No one answered the door at first. Victor's pickup sat in the driveway like a guard dog, but the curtains were drawn tight. I knew they were inside. They always hid when they were caught. Finally, after the officers knocked loudly 3 more times, Lenora cracked the door open, peering out with wide, fake innocent eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. I stepped forward just enough so she could see me standing beside the officers. "Where's my car, Lenora?" Her face flickered, just for a second, before she plastered on that rehearsed confusion. "Oh, sweetheart, you weren't using it. We thought it was fine." The officer beside me cleared his throat, unimpressed. "Ma'am, the vehicle belongs to her. She has proof. We need to resolve this now." Lenora had no choice. She handed over the keys with shaking fingers, mumbling something about how families are supposed to share. I didn't bother replying. I simply got into my car, noting the smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the seats, Victor's signature stench, and the fast food wrappers tossed carelessly on the passenger side. They had treated my property like trash because they thought they owned me. Not anymore. I drove away without looking back. That evening, just as Yvette and I were sharing takeout on her worn couch, a new insult slid under the apartment door. A crumpled envelope, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold font. "Return what you stole from this family or face the consequences. You think you're free, but blood doesn't break so easily. You will pay." There was no signature, but there didn't need to be. I recognized Victor's heavy-handed style and Lenora's flair for the dramatic all over it. Yvette looked up sharply as I read it aloud. "That's a threat. You should call the cops again." I nodded, but I was already pulling out my phone. Not to call immediately, but to photograph and save the evidence. Then I slid the letter into the same growing file where I kept screenshots, voicemails, and now, proof of theft. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was building a case. The next morning, I filed a police report for the theft and harassment. I didn't expect an instant arrest or miraculous justice overnight. But paper trails mattered. Documentation mattered. In a world where the loudest liars often drowned out the truth, I was learning how to speak in a language they couldn't twist. Before lunch, I contacted a local legal aid service and booked an appointment to discuss restraining orders and further action. Sitting across from the intake worker, a kind woman in her 50s who didn't flinch at my story, I laid it all out. Names, dates, evidence. She nodded grimly. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "It's going to be a long road, but you're taking the right steps." I left the legal aid office feeling lighter than I had in months, not because the war was over, but because I had finally picked up real weapons. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about justice. They wanted a war? Fine, but they would not like the battlefield I chose. Victory didn't feel like a parade. It felt like waking up to rain battering the windows after a night you thought might kill you, and realizing you were still breathing. I returned to work the next morning with a cautious optimism, determined to rebuild what my family had tried to destroy. I wore my calm like armor, ready to move forward without fear. But before I even finished my first cup of coffee at my desk, the whispers started. It began with glances, co-workers pulling each other aside, exchanging quick, concerned looks. One of them, a woman from accounting who used to chat with me over lunch, avoided my gaze entirely. At first I told myself I was imagining it. Until another coworker, Steve, from IT, accidentally left a printed email on the shared printer tray. It was a forwarded message, unsigned but dripping with venom. "Be cautious around Bambolina. Rumor has it she's under investigation for financial misconduct. Stole from her own parents. If she could betray her family, imagine what she might do here." The paper shook in my hands. My throat went dry. It wasn't just some office gossip. It was coordinated, crafted, launched like a missile straight at my credibility. And I knew exactly who had fired it. Victor. The style was unmistakable. Half-truths stretched into ugly caricatures, carefully seeded to inflict maximum doubt and isolation. He had always believed that the loudest story won, and if he couldn't control me, he would make sure no one else trusted me either. Before I could even process the first blow, another one hit. My direct manager, Mr. Andrews, called me into his office. His face was tight, professional, but not unfriendly. "Close the door," he said. I obeyed, heart hammering against my ribs. He folded his hands on the desk. "We received an anonymous complaint this morning. Allegations of elder abuse and financial exploitation. They didn't provide evidence, just accusations. I inhaled sharply but kept my face composed. And you believe it? He leaned back, studying me. I believe there's always two sides to a story. That's why I'm talking to you first. Thank God for small mercies. I reached into my bag, my hands steady, and pulled out the thick folder I'd been compiling over the past few weeks. Screenshots of threatening texts, saved voicemails, the theft report, proof of every payment made under coercion. I slid it across the desk without a word. He raised his eyebrows slightly but didn't interrupt. Page by page, he flipped through the evidence. I sat in silence, giving him space to absorb it all. When he finished, he closed the folder gently. You don't owe me an explanation, he said finally. But if you'd like to say something for the record. I met his eyes without flinching. I won't be judged by people who only know half the story. I did what I had to survive. I protected myself the way no one else ever did, and I refuse to apologize for that. He nodded slowly. Understood. There was a beat of silence. Then he added, voice low but firm, You're not the first person to survive something like this, and you won't be the last. Relief, raw and staggering, threatened to break through my carefully constructed wall. But I kept it together, just barely. I left his office with my head high. Still, the damage Victor and Lenora tried to inflict couldn't be completely erased. Some co-workers remained wary, some drifted away entirely. And that was fine. Let them go. Better to lose fair-weather friends than keep people around who needed no more than a whisper to turn on me. Later that evening, Yvette and I sat together in her tiny living room, unwinding after our respective workdays. She cracked open a soda and passed it to me without a word. No pep talks, no pity, just quiet solidarity. Anything new from the circus? She asked lightly. I shook my head, feeling a grim kind of satisfaction. They're getting desperate. Because that's what desperation looked like. Smearing, lying, clawing at someone else's life when your own was crumbling. It wasn't strength. It was the frantic thrashing of people who had already lost. As I stared out the window into the deepening dusk, I realized something profound. Their attacks didn't break me. They exposed them. And now, with my career intact, my reputation defended, and my boundaries unshakable, it was time to end this once and for all. Not with anger, not with screaming, but with cold, deliberate action. Their attacks only exposed their desperation. It was time to end this, legally and forever. The next blow didn't come as a surprise. It came in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope tucked between the usual junk mail at Yvette's place. No return address, no handwriting, just my name typed neatly across the front like a loaded gun aimed straight at my chest. I opened it cautiously, my stomach coiling into tight knots. Inside was a formal letter, one that looked official enough to make my heart stutter before I even registered the words. Victor was threatening to sue me. The claims were outrageous. Emotional distress, theft of familial resources, elder abuse. Attached was a ludicrously fabricated list of supposed debts. Charges for groceries I had bought, bills I had paid, gifts I had given willingly but were now twisted into loans I had stolen. At the bottom, a bold statement. Failure to repay the full amount plus emotional damages within 30 days will result in formal legal action. I let the papers fall onto the kitchen table, laughing under my breath. A dry, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. They were really doing it. They were trying to weaponize the law the same way they had weaponized family, guilt, loyalty. But not this time. This time, I was ready. I called the lawyer I had met at Legal Aid 2 weeks earlier. Within hours, we had a plan. Evidence was key, so I spent the next 2 nights compiling everything meticulously. The threatening voicemails and texts, the incident report I had filed for the theft, screenshots of social media harassment, bank statements showing unauthorized activity, witness statements, including Yvette's, verifying harassment and stalking. By the time we finished, my case wasn't just strong, it was airtight. When the day of the hearing came, I walked into the courthouse wearing the same black blazer I had worn to every job interview, every major life event where I needed to project strength I sometimes didn't feel. Today, the strength was real. Victor was already there, sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom, arms crossed over his chest like a sulking child. He didn't even look at me as I passed. Lenora was conspicuously absent. Whether out of shame or self-preservation, she had abandoned him to fight alone. I stepped into the courtroom with my lawyer by my side and didn't look back. The hearing itself felt surreal. Victor's lawyer, some slick local guy with an overconfident smile, tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who had taken advantage of her elderly, struggling parents. But when my lawyer laid out the evidence, documents, recordings, police reports, the smugness drained from their faces. Victor tried to object, tried to sputter some emotional appeal about family values and disrespect, but the judge wasn't buying it. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without trembling. I looked the judge in the eye and said clearly, "Love isn't loyalty when it demands your destruction." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. In the end, the judge granted me a full restraining order. No contact, no harassment, no attempts at communication, direct or indirect. Victor was fined for harassment and malicious litigation. His fabricated claims were dismissed with prejudice, meaning he couldn't file them again. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I had felt in years. Not victorious in the way movies portray it. There was no cheering, no confetti raining down, but victorious in the way that mattered. I was free. Truly free. As I crossed the courthouse parking lot, the sky overhead cracked open with a sudden downpour. I didn't run for cover. I let the rain soak through my clothes, wash over me, rinse off years of guilt and betrayal and lies. Freedom wasn't neat or tidy or easy. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. It was terrifying. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, no one else owned my future. Freedom wasn't given to me. I fought for it. And now, I would learn how to live it. The rain had finally stopped by the time I reached home. Or rather, the place that was slowly, surely becoming home. It wasn't grand. A second-floor walk-up with creaky stairs and a finicky heater. The furniture was mismatched. The curtains were hand-me-downs from Yvette, and the tiny balcony faced a cracked alleyway lined with battered trash cans. But it was mine. Every scuff on the floor, every chipped mug in the cupboard, every faded book stacked on the windowsill, all of it chosen, cleaned, or placed by my own hands. There was no shouting here, no veiled threats hidden behind smiles, no manipulation creeping like smoke through the walls. For the first time in my life, silence didn't mean danger. It meant peace. I started to settle into a new rhythm, slow, cautious, but real. Early mornings sipping lukewarm coffee on the balcony, evenings filling out job applications for promotions, studying online courses Yvette had suggested. On weekends, I'd wander the local farmers market, picking out cheap vegetables and secondhand novels, breathing in the quiet hum of a life finally unhooked from survival mode. It was during one of these weekends, sorting through a box of worn mystery paperbacks at a sidewalk sale, that I got the news. A distant cousin, someone I barely spoke to, messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, heard about your folks. Real shame. Hope you're doing okay." Confused, I messaged back carefully, prying without looking too interested. What came back made my stomach twist, not with fear this time, but a grim, detached pity. Lenora's terminal illness? Fabricated. A sympathy stunt to gather support, but it had backfired. Badly. Once the truth leaked, Victor and Lenora became pariahs, evicted from their rental after failing to pay bills, cut off by the extended family. No friends left to peddle their sob stories to. Just two aging grifters stewing in the ruins of the empire they built on manipulation. There was no glee in the knowledge, no satisfaction, only a hollow, bittersweet ache. They had spent their lives hollowing out the people around them. Now, they were the empty ones. I closed my phone slowly, staring out at the busy street. It was over. Not with fireworks, not with apologies, but with silence, the kind that spoke louder than any scream ever could. Weeks passed. I didn't seek updates. I didn't stalk their social media or pry through gossip. I had a life to build. One evening, as spring began to thaw the edges of winter, my phone buzzed. Devlin. The name lit up my screen like a small flare in the dark. I answered on the second ring, my heart tight in my chest. "Hey," he said, voice rough, uncertain. "Can I come stay with you?" He didn't have to explain. He didn't owe me a speech. I could hear everything in the way his voice cracked just slightly. The exhaustion, the betrayal, the desperate hope. "I packed a bag," he added. "I don't want to be like them." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "I'll come get you," I said simply. By the time I pulled up outside the shabby house, the house that had once been my own prison, Devlin was already waiting on the curb, a battered backpack slung over one shoulder, shoulders squared, jaw set. He climbed into my car without a word, and we didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, I helped him enroll in a local community college. We found him a dorm room with a roommate who didn't ask too many questions. I taught him how to set up a checking account, how to apply for scholarships, how to read a lease before signing anything. One night, after a marathon of cheap pizza and late-night paperwork, he looked at me across the tiny kitchen table and said, "You showed me it's okay to walk away from people who only know how to hurt." I didn't say anything at first. I just nodded, swallowing around the lump in my throat. Because I needed to hear it too. Freedom wasn't about the absence of pain. It was about the presence of choice. A few months later, we sat on a bench at the edge of a local park, watching kids kick around a battered soccer ball under the pink swell of a setting sun. Devlin laughed at something on his phone, a deep, genuine laugh that crinkled his whole face. I hadn't heard him laugh like that since we were kids, before life taught us to tiptoe around landmines disguised as parents. I leaned back, letting the last golden rays warm my face. Healing wasn't clean. It wasn't a straight line. It was messy, jagged, stitched together with scar tissue and stubborn hope. Some days still hurt. Some nights still woke me gasping from nightmares I couldn't quite shake. But they were fewer now. The house I left behind, the people I left behind, were never a home. They were a cage. What I was building now with my own hands, one clumsy brick at a time, that was a home. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. It was real. It was mine. And finally, I was free to live it. If there's one thing my journey taught me, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect, by kindness, by the freedom to be yourself without fear. I spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a good daughter meant losing myself piece by piece. But the truth is, love without respect isn't love at all. You don't owe your soul to anyone just because they share your last name. Freedom isn't easy. It's messy. It's painful. But it's worth every step. If you're standing at the edge of a hard decision, if you're carrying the weight of people who only know how to hurt, please hear me when I say, you are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not cruel for protecting your heart. You deserve a life that feels like yours. And if no one has told you today, I'm proud of you. You are stronger than you think. You are allowed to outgrow the people who refuse to grow with you. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship, even if it hurt? What was the hardest part? Or if you're still in that place, what would freedom look like for you? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched your heart, type 1 inch in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. And if you didn't love it, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'd love to hear your honest thoughts. Let's build a community where stories heal, not hurt. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you want more real, raw stories like this. Stories that remind you, you are never alone. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story. Hi there. I'm Amelia. My parents once told me I was too ambitious, too undeserving to help. They gave my sister a beautiful lake house, while I was left fighting for scraps. But what hurts more than betrayal is realizing it was never about love. It was about control. They stole my trust, forged my name, mortgaged everything, without a second thought. And the day I found out, it didn't break me. It built the fire that burned everything fake between us. How far can family go before they stop being family? The night before my scheduled meeting with the bank, I sat in my tiny apartment, notebook open on my lap, hopeful for once. Maybe, just maybe, my parents would recognize how hard I'd worked to get here. Maybe they'd want to help their daughter finally own her first home. The ringtone snapped me out of my daydream. Mom and Dad, flashed across the screen. I grabbed the phone so quickly I nearly dropped it. Hi, sweetheart, my mother's voice cooed. We've been thinking about you, about your situation. Something about the way she said situation made my stomach knot. Before I could respond, she continued, Your father and I talked, and we don't think helping you buy a house is the right move right now. The words hit harder than I expected. I tried to process, to find a way to salvage the conversation. I thought, maybe, after everything, Dad cut in, his voice gruff, impatient. You're too ambitious, Amelia. Always chasing, pushing. Men don't like women who act like that. It's time to slow down, find someone, settle. You're not getting any younger, you know. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Years of independence, sacrifice, late nights building my business. They reduced it to some desperate need for a husband? I understand, I managed, even though I didn't, not even close. I gripped the notebook tighter, the pages bending under my fingers. Thanks for letting me know. Love you, honey, Mom said, a little too brightly, before hanging up. The call ended. The apartment felt colder somehow, emptier. I stared at the wall across from me, the colorless beige seeming to stretch on forever. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. Always had been. When Dad lost his job 5 years ago, who picked up their mortgage payments? When Mom needed surgery, who covered the deductible insurance wouldn't? Me. It had always been me. Quietly, without asking anything in return. Yet here I was. Ambitious, yes, and apparently punishable for it. I closed my notebook and set it aside carefully. No slamming, no drama. They would never see my anger. They didn't deserve the satisfaction. If building a life meant walking this road alone, so be it. I'd been doing it alone for years anyway. I just hadn't admitted it to myself until now. I turned off the lamp, letting the darkness settle around me. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. A quiet, sharp line being drawn in permanent ink. They had closed the door. I wasn't going to knock again. The morning after that decision carved itself into my bones, I went through the motions. Coffee, emails, more coffee. The world outside my window spun on, uncaring of the silent war unraveling inside me. Weeks passed in a strange blur, each day sharpening the edges of my resolve. 2 weeks later, sitting in the same threadbare armchair, I scrolled mindlessly through Facebook while sipping lukewarm coffee. My thumb froze mid-scroll. There it was, a post from my mother. Wanda Carter feeling blessed, the caption screamed above a collage of smiling faces, my parents, Carla, and behind them, a sprawling, sun-drenched lake house. Balloons spelled out, Congrats, Carla, over a pristine wooden deck. Champagne glasses gleamed in their hands. Blessed indeed. I stared at the screen, each image carving another gash across my chest. No call, no text, not even a casual mention. But there they were, throwing a party, celebrating my little sister's milestone. The same parents who said helping me would be unwise. The same father who lectured me about debt. The same mother who worried about my image as a single-driven woman. And here they were, shamelessly crowning Carla with a lakefront palace. Scrolling through the comments felt like pouring salt in an open wound. Aunt May, she deserves it after everything she's been through. Uncle Joe, finally settling down, huh? Proud of you, kiddo. Settling down. Of course, Carla, the professional damsel in distress. No stable job, no real plans. Just a string of almosts and maybes trailing behind her like loose threads. But she needed saving. That made her lovable. That made her worthy. I slammed my laptop shut harder than necessary, the echo ricocheting off the apartment's bare walls. They didn't even bother hiding the favoritism anymore. No invite to the housewarming. No fake excuse about being busy or out of town. Just silence. Maybe they never wanted a daughter who fought her own battles. Maybe love in their world came with strings attached. The more helpless you looked, the tighter they tied them around you. My heart thudded against my ribs, not from sadness, but from something rawer, something closer to fury. I stood, the chair scraping sharply against the floor, and paced the room. No more polite smiles, no more silent nods. If they could celebrate Carla's fabricated fairy tale without shame, then I would reclaim my worth without guilt. I didn't know how yet, but a fire had been lit, steady and burning. And this time, I wouldn't be the good daughter who sat quietly while the world handed her nothing. The fire inside me didn't die after that night. It smoldered, fed quietly by every fake smile and every memory of the times I had been the reliable one, invisible unless needed. 3 weeks later, a slow, steady rain tapped against the windows as I sat in my cramped home office, sorting a year's worth of paperwork for tax season. Receipts, statements, folders labeled with permanent marker. It was mindless work, and for once I welcomed the distraction, until I saw it, a transfer, a large one, $10,000, sent to my parents' account just 6 months ago. I frowned. That money was supposed to be for Dad's hospital bills. At least that's what they'd said when they asked. I flipped through the papers again, my fingers stiff. There it was, clear as day, labeled Emergency Medical Expenses. A knot tightened in my stomach. Something felt wrong. I picked up the phone, called the hospital where Dad had supposedly undergone treatment. After navigating through endless hold music and polite but indifferent operators, I finally reached billing. "No, ma'am," the woman said, typing something on her end. "There's no outstanding balance on Mr. Carter's account. His insurance covered everything last year. There's no payment needed from family members." The rain outside blurred against the glass, distorting the world beyond my window into muted, colorless smears. I hung up without thanking her. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the bank statements. One transfer turned into 2, then 3, emergency after emergency. Tuition help for Carla, mortgage help for my parents, car repairs, health insurance gaps, each labeled with just enough urgency to silence any suspicion. And now, a lake house. The betrayal was so thorough, so systematic, it almost deserved admiration. Almost. My jaw tightened. Years of sacrifice, of pulling overtime shifts, skipping vacations, ignoring my own financial goals, all built on a lie. They hadn't seen me as a daughter. Not as a person, just a resource, a wallet with legs. The realization didn't come crashing down. It seeped into me like slow poison, coating every memory with a bitter aftertaste, every thank you that felt hollow, every "we're so proud of you" that now sounded like mockery. I pushed the papers away, standing so fast the chair squealed against the hardwood floor. No more silent giving, no more letting them dip their hands into my life like it was their birthright. If betrayal was a family tradition, I was ending the cycle, even if I had to burn the whole illusion down to do it. The rain had returned, drumming steady against the windows as twilight bled into night. I stayed at my desk, the piles of papers now less a project and more a battleground. Somewhere between the insurance forms and the old loan agreements, my fingers hesitated. Something wasn't right. A signature, my signature, glared up at me from a loan application I didn't remember authorizing. My name, in familiar curves and loops, but the tail of the A in Amelia curled too tightly. Whoever had done this had almost gotten it right. Almost. My hands went cold. I flipped through the stack with growing urgency, my breath quickening with every page. There it was again. And again. Student loans for Carla, a refinancing document for my parents' mortgage, even a personal line of credit tied to my name but never touched by me. It wasn't sloppy. It was meticulous. Planned. I leaned back in the chair, the fake leather creaking under me. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. This wasn't some impulsive mistake. This was a system, a long, carefully orchestrated theft of not just my money but my identity. They hadn't just leaned on me for help. They had stolen my trust and forged it into shackles. My stomach twisted violently, but no tears came. Only a sharp, brutal clarity. I thought about every time my parents had praised me in public, for being so responsible, for being such a blessing. What a joke. They hadn't been proud of me. They had been proud of how easily I could be used. I grabbed my phone, thumbs flying over the screen. I typed a message to my mother, to my father, to Carla. Cold, clipped, undeniable. I know about the signatures. I stared at the message, my finger hovering over send. No, not yet. They weren't ready for the war they had started. And I wasn't going to warn them before I was fully armed. Instead, I saved the draft, tucking it away like a loaded gun. Next time they crossed a line, it wouldn't be silence they received. It would be fire. Morning came with a cold determination threading through my veins. I dressed with mechanical precision, slipped into my coat, and drove to the bank. Not to beg, not to borrow, but to lay foundations for my own future, not the wreckage they'd tried to leave me in. The meeting was supposed to be routine, checking on my savings, exploring investment options. Routine until it wasn't. The banker, Mr. Lyle, a graying man with kind eyes, frowned at the screen longer than usual. He leaned forward, voice dropping low like we were conspiring. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "did you co-sign a second mortgage recently?" The words hit like a slap. "No," I said sharply. "Why?" He hesitated, then turned the monitor toward me. There it was, black and white. My parents' house, once fully theirs, now tied to a massive loan taken out just 6 months earlier, co-signed by Carla, and facilitated by Stuart and Wanda. Not a whisper to me, not a courtesy call. They had put everything they had on the line. Not for me. For Carla. The bile in my throat burned hot as fire. "Can I see the documents?" I asked, my voice a scalpel. Minutes later, I sat in a private room, flipping through copies. My name wasn't there, thank God, but it didn't lessen the sting. My family had mortgaged the home I grew up in, risked losing it, to bankroll my sister's fantasy life by the lake. No conversations, no warnings, just betrayal signed in ink and sealed with champagne smiles. I traced the shaky signatures. Stuart's bold, practiced scrawl, Wanda's careful loops, Carla's uncertain hand, almost hesitant, as if she knew, deep down, she was building a castle on stolen ground. The walls around my heart hardened another inch. They hadn't just seen me as a wallet anymore. They had started betting the house without blinking, and I wasn't going to wait for the wreckage to bury me too. Driving home, I didn't blast music. I didn't cry. I plodded. Each breath was a brick stacking in my own fortress. I sat down at my desk and drafted a letter. Formal, cold, and precise. A certified warning. Any further attempt to tie my name to financial dealings without my explicit written consent will be met with full legal action. I printed 2 copies, one for my records, one for them. I sealed it, addressed it, and set it aside with grim finality. Family, once lost to greed, became nothing more than strangers in shared blood. And if they thought my silence meant surrender, they were about to learn just how loud war could be. The letter was sent. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was a pressure cooker set on high. I could feel it hissing under the surface, waiting for the first crack to split everything wide open. But I didn't wait for them to react. I moved first. 2 months later, on a cold, gray morning that matched my mood, I walked into the county courthouse. Not as Amelia Carter, betrayed daughter, as a buyer, as the hammer they never saw coming. Damian Cross, my attorney, stood beside me in a dark suit, calm and unreadable. It had been his idea to create a proxy company, to mask my identity, to make the purchase clean and airtight. No messy family drama attached to the paperwork. The auction room was a dull, hollow place. Rows of folding chairs, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, a stale smell of old coffee, a handful of bidders shuffled papers, checked phones. No one paid me any mind. Perfect. When the property came up, the lake house, my heart hammered once, then settled into a steady, icy rhythm. The auctioneer's voice droned, "Opening bid at $150,000. Damien nodded subtly. We placed the bid. There was a murmur in the room. Some interest, but nothing fierce. This wasn't some glamorous estate. It was a debt-sunk house built on illusions. The bids ticked upward in sluggish increments. I didn't flinch. Neither did Damien. Finally, with a sharp rap of the gavel, the house was mine. No applause, no music, just the quiet folding of papers and the scratch of pens signing away a dream they had bankrupted themselves chasing. As we stepped outside, the winter air slapped my face. I inhaled deeply, letting the cold burn through me, not as punishment, as purification. Their greed had forced this. Their greed had gifted me this. Back at home, I sat by my window with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out at the gray skies. In a few weeks, the ownership papers would be finalized. My name wouldn't appear anywhere in public records, thanks to Damien's careful maneuvering. To the world, the house would belong to a faceless investment firm. To me, it was a symbol, not of victory, but of self-rescue. No grand speeches, no Facebook announcements with champagne toasts, just a quiet reclaiming of everything they thought they could control. When the envelope arrived, thick, heavy, final, I opened it slowly. Inside, the deed. The house was mine. They bet everything on me staying silent. They lost. The paperwork was barely dry when the first cracks began to show. 1 week after the deed was in my hands, I woke to my phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. Texts, missed calls, screenshots. At first, I thought something had happened. A car accident, an emergency. My stomach twisted in that half-awake panic, but as my eyes focused, the reality burned colder. Carla had gone live. I opened Facebook and there it was. A shaky, poorly lit live stream. Carla in full meltdown mode, sobbing so hard her words slurred together. "She just left us to drown," she wailed into the camera. "After everything our family sacrificed for her. My parents are losing everything because she's selfish. She's heartless." Behind her, Mom's voice chimed in faintly. "We gave her everything, and this is how she repays us." It was a performance. A gut-wrenching, nauseating play staged for pity clicks. The comments rolled in fast. "How could a daughter do that? Stay strong, Carla. Family should stick together." I put the phone down carefully like it might explode. It wasn't enough for them to stab me quietly anymore. Now they wanted to parade my blood around for sympathy. Hours later, the second strike came. Articles started popping up on local news sites, tiny blogs, Facebook groups, even the church bulletin's online board. Stories that sounded suspiciously scripted. Amelia Carter accused of financial manipulation. Amelia Carter abandons ailing parents. Wanda's fingerprints were all over it. The same phrases she used to cut me down behind closed doors, now thrown to the masses. She's unstable. She always thought she was better than us. Money changes people. The lies spread like oil on water, fast, ugly, unstoppable. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years messaged me, some passive-aggressive, some downright cruel. "Guess you finally showed your true colors." You should be ashamed. I sat on my couch, the gray afternoon light slicing across the hardwood floor, letting the anger settle into something harder. Something surgical. This wasn't a family misunderstanding anymore. It was war. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I called Skyla, my attorney friend who knew exactly how dirty these battles could get. "Screenshot everything," she advised crisply. "Save every post, every comment, every message. Don't engage. Build your case." So I did. Quietly, methodically. Every tear Carla cried into her front-facing camera. Every lie Wanda spun to some desperate Facebook group. Every sneering comment from distant cousins who didn't know the first damn thing about my life. Saved, cataloged, admissible. They wanted a public execution. I was building a legal arsenal. Let them scream into the void. I would answer in court. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, dropped unceremoniously through my apartment mail slot. A thick packet, official, heavy in my hands, stamped in bold red. Legal notice. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I knew them too well. Still, I sliced it open, reading each page slowly like sharpening a blade. Stuart Carter, my father, was suing me for control of the lake house, accusing me of elder exploitation, claiming I had manipulated my parents into losing everything. Attached, another bomb. Carla filing a personal claim stating I owed her thousands in unpaid family debts. Fabricated out of thin air. They weren't fighting fair anymore. They were trying to bury me under paper. I drove straight to Damien's office downtown, the packet clutched tight against my chest. Damien barely skimmed the documents before letting out a low, humorless chuckle. "They really think they can gaslight a judge?" he muttered. Skyla arrived minutes later, arms already full of folders, her heels clicking sharp across the marble floor. By noon, the war room was set. Evidence pinned to boards, timelines mapped out, witness lists drafted, forgery, financial manipulation, defamation. Each lie they'd flung into the public was now a loaded weapon, but aimed squarely back at them. 2 weeks later, we stood in the heavy air of the county courthouse. The wooden benches creaked under restless bodies. Family members, real and distant, packed the room, eyes sharp, mouths tight. I didn't look at Carla or Stuart as I entered. I focused straight ahead, heart hammering a steady, ruthless beat. The judge called the case. Opening arguments began. Their lawyers spun stories about loyalty, sacrifice, betrayal, about a greedy daughter who abandoned her aging parents. I kept my face neutral, my spine locked straight. Then Damien rose, calm, precise, and eviscerated them. Signed bank transfers to Carla hidden under the guise of medical loans. Forged documents using my signature. Pixel analysis proving the fraud. Social media posts and live streams painting a false narrative. Time-stamped, screen-captured, undeniable. Under cross-examination, Stuart stumbled. His story shifted. Dates didn't match. Carla's tears dried up when asked basic financial questions. The truth wasn't just slipping through the cracks. It was gushing out in a flood they couldn't stop. I sat there, silent, steady, letting the evidence scream for me. By late afternoon, the judge called both sides into chambers for a preliminary ruling. I gripped the edge of my chair as he spoke, voice even, but heavy with judgment. Given the overwhelming evidence of fraudulent behavior by the plaintiffs, this court finds sufficient cause to dismiss their claims with prejudice. Furthermore, this court recommends criminal investigation into possible financial misconduct. The room buzzed, a low, stunned hum. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply exhaled. The first clean breath in months. They bet their future on my silence. I bet mine on the truth. And the truth was louder than all their lies. The courthouse doors slammed shut behind me, but the verdict's echo lingered far longer than any gavel crack. The fallout was swift. Stuart and Carla lost everything. The IRS dug up years of shady finances and unpaid taxes. Their prized lake house was seized to pay debts they could no longer hide. Wanda vanished from public life. No more polished brunch photos or gala snapshots. Their old friends fell away too, whether out of disgust or self-preservation. There was no final showdown, no fireworks, just a heavy, lasting silence. Strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. Watching them fall brought no thrill, only a cold, exhausted relief. Like shedding chains I had carried so long they felt like part of me. 6 months later, I stood outside a small building in downtown Madison. A plain brass plaque by the door read, Freedom House. Inside, volunteers bustled around, setting up chairs and coffee stations, stringing welcome banners. Tonight was the official launch, a center to help women escape financial abuse, offering legal aid, financial classes, emergency housing. A place I desperately needed once, but had to survive without. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, heart pounding, not from fear, but from purpose. Across the street, a local news crew was setting up. A few reporters mingled. I caught sight of Skyla and Damien chatting by the snack table, their easy smiles grounding me. The ceremony was simple, a few brief speeches, some quiet applause, no champagne, no big gestures, just a stubborn belief that broken beginnings could still grow into something good. After the last guest left, I wandered the main room alone, running my fingers along the new welcome desk, the resource wall, the rows of pamphlets full of hope. The scars of the past were still there. Some nights, I woke up gasping, flashes of forged signatures and courtroom scenes still haunting me, but they no longer owned me, they marked me, they shaped me, and now they led me forward. As the first light of dawn crept across the sky, I stepped outside, pulling my coat tight against the chill. Behind me, Freedom House glowed warm against the breaking day. Ahead of me, the world stretched wide and waiting. Freedom isn't about forgetting your scars. It's about living boldly with them. In the end, what this journey taught me is simple. Silence does not protect you. It only delays the moment you must stand up and fight for your worth. If your own family can't see your value beyond what you provide, it's not your failure. It's theirs. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to build a future where your scars remind you of your strength, not your shame. I learned that freedom isn't something anyone hands you. It's something you build, brick by brick, even when your hands are shaking. And maybe, just maybe, your greatest act of love for yourself is walking away from those who never truly loved you at all. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because they only saw you as what you could give them? What did standing up for yourself teach you? Drop a 1 inch in the comments if this story touched your heart, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't quite connect with it, let me know why. I welcome all perspectives. If you found value in this journey, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next powerful story we'll share together. Let's keep building a community where truth, strength, and healing matter. Thank you for being here.